The tires crunched against the gravel, a sound that sliced through the stillness of the lake cabin's dusk like a knife through my heart. I stood frozen on the porch, my breath shallow, watching the familiar silver SUV pull up, the one my husband, David, swore he'd sold months ago. Beside him, her silhouette unmistakable even through the tinted windows, was her, Lila, the woman who'd been unraveling my marriage thread by thread. I wasn't supposed to be here. David thought I was at a work conference in Chicago, oblivious to his lies, his late-night texts, his business trips that reeked of perfume I didn't wear. But I'd known for weeks, piecing together the betrayal like a puzzle I wished I could unsee. The cabin, our sanctuary, where we'd laughed, loved, and promised forever, was now their stage. My hands trembled as I gripped the railing, but my resolve was steel. I wasn't alone. Inside, waiting in the shadowed living room, was Mark, Lila's husband, a man as broken as I was, but just as ready for reckoning. It started 3 months ago, a gut punch disguised as a careless mistake. David left his phone on the kitchen counter, a notification lighting up the screen. "Can't wait to see you at the cabin, babe." My world tilted. The cabin was sacred, our escape from the grind of Seattle, where we'd skinny dipped under starlight and planned our future. I confronted him, heart pounding, expecting tears, apologies, anything but the gaslighting that followed. "You're paranoid, Claire," he'd said, his blue eyes cold. "It's just a friend." But I wasn't a fool. I dug deeper, credit card statements, late-night calls, a receipt for a necklace I'd never worn. Each clue was a shard in my chest, but I didn't break. I planned. Mark was a stranger until a week ago. I found him through a mutual friend, a desperate call after I tracked Lila's name from David's phone. Mark's voice on the phone was raw, like he'd been crying for days. "She's been distant," he admitted. I thought it was work stress, but God, Claire, how did we miss this? We met at a diner, two wounded souls swapping stories of betrayal over cold coffee. Lila had told him she was visiting her sister this weekend. David had spun the same lie about a fishing trip with friends. They thought they were clever, sneaking off to our cabin. They didn't know we'd be waiting. The SUV's doors opened, and David stepped out, his easy grin fading as he spotted me on the porch. Lila followed, her auburn hair catching the fading sunlight, her laugh dying in her throat. "Claire." David's voice cracked, a mix of shock and guilt. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Mark stepped out from the cabin's doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, his face a mask of quiet rage. Lila's eyes widened, her purse slipping from her hand. The air was thick, electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. "What the hell is this?" David demanded, his bravado crumbling as he glanced between me and Mark. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "You tell me, David. You brought her to our cabin. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Lila's gaze darted to Mark, her lips parting, but no words came. Mark's voice was low, dangerous. "Lila, you said you were with your sister. Funny how your sister's in our bed with Claire's husband." The silence that followed was deafening. David's face drained of color, his hands balling into fists. Lila stammered. "Mark, I can explain," but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Don't," he said, his voice breaking. "Just don't." I felt a pang of pity for her, fleeting but sharp. She was younger, maybe 32, with a softness in her features that made her look almost innocent. But innocence doesn't lie, doesn't sneak, doesn't destroy. I turned to David, my husband of 15 years, the man who'd vowed to love me through sickness and health. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why her? Why here?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes dropped to the ground, and I saw it. The shame, the cowardice. Lila reached for his arm, a desperate gesture, but he pulled away. The gesture was small, but it cut deeper than any words. They weren't a team, not really. They were just two people who'd mistaken lust for something worth burning their lives down for. Mark and I had planned this moment, but not what came next. We'd agreed to confront them, to expose their lies in the place that meant the most to us. The cabin was more than wood and stone. It was our history, our refuge. David and Lila had tainted it, but we wouldn't let them destroy it. "You're going to listen," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Both of you. You're going to hear what this has done to us. Mark nodded, his jaw tight. And then you're going to leave. Not just the cabin, our lives. His words hung heavy, a promise and a threat. Lila's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. Not yet. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lake. The confrontation was just the beginning, and the night was far from over. The air grew colder as the last light bled from the sky, the lake reflecting a bruised purple hue. David stood rooted by the SUV, his hands shoved in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. Lila clutched her arms, shivering, her eyes darting between Mark and the gravel path, as if she could will an escape. I wanted to scream, to shatter the silence with every ounce of pain I'd carried for weeks, but I held back. This wasn't about losing control, it was about taking it back. Mark broke the standoff, stepping off the porch toward Lila. "How long?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "How long have you been lying to me?" Lila's lips trembled, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said. "It was just a mistake." A mistake. The word landed like a slap. I turned to David, my heart pounding. "A mistake," I echoed. "You brought her to our cabin, David. Our place. You planned this. That's not a mistake, it's a choice." David's jaw tightened, but he still wouldn't meet my eyes. "Claire, I didn't mean to hurt you," he muttered. The words were hollow, a reflex of a man caught red-handed. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that startled even me. "You didn't mean to hurt me? You've been lying for months. You let me think I was crazy, David. You let me question myself while you—" My voice broke, and I hated myself for it. I didn't want him to see me crack, not now. Mark's gaze was fixed on Lila, his pain raw and unguarded. "We have a daughter, Lila," he said, his voice shaking. "You left her with your mom to come here with him?" Lila's tears spilled over, her hands covering her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't think." "You didn't think," Mark interrupted, his voice rising. "You didn't think about me, about Emily, about what this would do to us." The mention of their daughter, Emily, hit me like a wave. I thought of our own son, Ethan, at home with my sister, oblivious to the storm tearing through his parents' lives. I stepped closer to David, forcing him to look at me. "Do you even care about Ethan?" I asked. "Do you care that he's going to grow up knowing his father threw us away for her?" David flinched, his eyes finally meeting mine. There was something there. Guilt, maybe regret, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. "I love Ethan," he said, his voice hoarse. "And I love you, Claire. I got lost." "Lost?" I spat. "You didn't get lost, David. You chose this. You chose her." I gestured toward Lila, who looked small, almost fragile, under the weight of Mark's stare. For a moment, I wondered what she saw in David, a charming architect with graying temples and a smile that used to make my heart skip. Did she see the man who'd built this cabin with his own hands, who'd carried me over the threshold when we bought it? Or did she just see an escape, a thrill, a way out of her own crumbling marriage? Mark turned to me, his eyes dark with resolve. "Claire, let's do this." We'd planned to make them face the wreckage, not just emotionally, but tangibly. I nodded, my heart racing. "Follow me," I said, leading the way into the cabin. David and Lila hesitated, exchanging a glance, but they followed, their footsteps heavy on the wooden steps. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and memories, the walls lined with photos of Ethan's first fishing trip, our anniversaries, moments that felt like a lifetime ago. I pointed to the dining table, where Mark and I had laid out our evidence, printed texts, receipts, photos from a private investigator I'd hired after that first gut-wrenching text. David's face paled as he scanned the papers, his lies spread out like a map of his betrayal. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You spied on us?" she whispered, her voice trembling with indignation. I almost laughed. "You don't get to play the victim, Lila," I said. "You both did this. Now you deal with it." Mark picked up a photo, a grainy shot of David and Lila at a hotel, their arms entwined. "This is what you chose over our family," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. "You think this was worth it?" Lila shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she repeated, as if the words could undo the damage. David reached for her hand, a reflex, but she pulled away, mirroring his rejection outside. The fracture between them was already forming, their affair crumbling under the weight of exposure. "We're not here to yell or fight," I said, though my voice trembled with the effort to stay calm. "We're here to make you see what you've done. To us, to our families, to everything we built." I gestured to the cabin, its warmth now a mockery of what it once meant. "This place was ours, David. You tainted it. But I'm taking it back." Mark nodded, his voice firm. "And so am I, Lila. You don't get to walk away clean." The night stretched on, the four of us trapped in a dance of guilt, anger, and grief. David tried to explain, his words stumbling over excuses, stress at work, feeling unappreciated, the lure of something new. Lila's story was similar, a mirror of his, a marriage grown stale, a hunger for validation. But their reasons didn't matter. They'd made choices, and now they'd face the consequences. Mark and I had agreed on one thing. We wouldn't let them off easy. Not tonight, not ever. The cabin's clock ticked loudly, each second a hammer against the silence. David sat at the table, head in his hands, the evidence of his affair spread before him like a confession he couldn't retract. Lila stood by the window, her back to us, staring out at the dark lake as if it held answers. Mark paced, his anger a living thing, barely contained. I wanted to feel triumphant, to savor their discomfort, but all I felt was a hollow ache where love used to be. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't just about you two sneaking around. It's about what you've broken." I picked up a photo from the table. Ethan, 6 years old, grinning with a fish he'd caught right here at the lake. "He's going to ask why, David. What do I tell him?" David's shoulders shook, but he didn't look up. His silence was worse than any excuse, a confirmation that he'd traded our son's trust for a fleeting thrill. Mark stopped pacing, his eyes on Lila. "Emily's only 4, he said, his voice thick. "She thinks you hung the moon, Lila. How do I explain this to her?" Lila turned, her face streaked with tears. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she whispered. "I love her, Mark. I love you." Her words sounded sincere, but they rang hollow, drowned out by months of deception. Mark shook his head, his jaw tight. "Love doesn't do this," he said. "Love doesn't lie." I'd spent weeks imagining this moment, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd make David feel the weight of his betrayal. But now, faced with his defeat, I felt no relief. Just loss. The cabin, once filled with laughter and warmth, felt like a mausoleum, preserving the ghost of our marriage. I walked to the fireplace, touching the mantel where we'd carved our initials years ago, D and C, a naive promise of forever. "You brought her here," I said, my voice low. "To our place. Did you even think about me when you made that choice?" David finally looked up, his eyes red. "I thought about you every day," he said, his voice barely audible. "I know I screwed up, Claire. I know I hurt you. I don't know how to fix this." His honesty, belated as it was, caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw the man I'd married, the one who'd built this cabin, who'd danced with me under the stars. But that man was gone, buried under lies and choices I couldn't forgive. Mark's voice broke the moment. "You don't get to fix this," he said, glaring at David, then Lila. "You both made your choices. Now we make ours." He turned to me, his expression resolute. "Claire, are we ready?" I nodded, my heart pounding. We'd planned more than just a confrontation. We'd planned to reclaim our dignity, our power, our futures. I pulled a folder from my bag, the one we'd prepared together, and slid it across the table. "These are divorce papers," I said. "For both of you." Lila gasped, her hand flying to her chest. David's eyes widened, his mouth opening, but no words came. The papers were a statement, a line in the sand. Mark and I had spent hours with lawyers, ensuring every detail was ironclad. "You don't get to walk away unscathed," I said. "You don't get to keep the lives you had while we pick up the pieces." Mark added, "We're done being your collateral damage." The weight of the papers seemed to anchor the room, grounding the chaos. David reached for them, his hands shaking, but I pulled them back. "Not yet," I said. "First, you listen." We made them sit, forcing them to hear the stories they'd ignored. Mark's sleepless nights, wondering why Lila pulled away, my panic attacks, hidden from Ethan, as I unraveled David's lies. We spoke of our children, our homes, the trust they'd shattered. Lila sobbed, her apologies a broken record. David was silent, his guilt a heavy shroud. As the night wore on, the dynamic shifted. David and Lila began to turn on each other, their fragile alliance cracking. "You said no one would find out," Lila hissed at David, her voice sharp. "You said it was safe." David shot back. "You wanted this as much as I did. Don't put it all on me." Their bickering was almost pathetic, a reminder that their affair was built on sand, not stone. Mark and I exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that we'd done enough for tonight. The real consequences would come later. Before they left, I had one final demand. "You're not staying here," I said, my voice firm. "This cabin is mine. You don't get to taint it any more than you already have." David nodded, his fight gone. Lila hesitated, looking to Mark, but he turned away, his rejection absolute. They gathered their things in silence, the weight of their choices pressing down on them. As their SUV disappeared down the gravel path, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. The cabin was too quiet after they left, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. Mark and I stood in the living room, the divorce papers still on the table, a tangible reminder of the line we'd drawn. Outside, the lake lapped gently at the shore, indifferent to the wreckage of our lives. I wanted to feel victorious, but all I felt was the weight of what came next, rebuilding, explaining, surviving. Mark sank into a chair, his hands running through his hair. "Did we do the right thing?" he asked, his voice raw. I sat across from him, my own doubts swirling. "We did what we had to," I said. "They needed to see the damage. We needed to take back control." But even as I spoke, I wondered if control was an illusion. Could I ever erase the image of David and Lila together in our cabin? Could Mark unhear Lila's excuses, her tears? We spent the night talking, not as allies in revenge, but as two people bound by shared grief. Mark told me about Emily, how she'd started asking why Mommy was always gone. I shared stories of Ethan, his quiet questions about why Daddy seemed so distant. Our children were the true casualties, and that truth cut deeper than any betrayal. "How do we protect them?" I asked, my voice breaking. Mark's eyes met mine, steady despite his pain. "We tell them the truth, but not the hate. They deserve better than our anger." Morning broke over the lake, the sunlight spilling through the windows, illuminating the dust motes in the air. The cabin felt different now, less like a battleground and more like a place to heal. Mark and I made coffee, the routine grounding us. "What's next for you?" I asked, cradling my mug. He sighed, staring out at the water. "I take Emily and start over. Maybe move closer to my parents. Lila, she'll have to figure out her own path." His voice was resolute, but I saw the flicker of doubt. Starting over sounded simple, but it was a mountain to climb. For me, the path was murkier. David and I had built a life together, 15 years, a son, a home. Could I unravel it all without losing myself? The divorce papers were a start, but they weren't the end. I thought of Ethan, his trusting eyes, his belief that his parents were unbreakable. I'd have to tell him something, but not everything. "Not yet. I'm keeping the cabin," I said, more to myself than to Mark. "It's mine. Ethan's. Not David's anymore." Mark nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Good. Don't let him take that from you." We sat in companionable silence, the weight of the night settling into something manageable. We weren't friends, not really, but we were something else, survivors, maybe, or warriors who'd fought the same battle. Before he left, Mark handed me his number. "If you need to talk, Claire, about the kids, about any of this." I took it, grateful for the lifeline. Alone in the cabin, I walked through each room, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. The bed where David and Lila had planned to sleep was untouched, the sheets crisp and clean. I stripped them anyway, a small act of reclamation. I opened the windows, letting the lake air sweep away the staleness. This place was mine, and I'd make it whole again, for me and Ethan. The thought gave me strength, a spark of hope amid the ashes. Back in Seattle, reality waited. David called that evening, his voice tentative. "Can we talk?" he asked. I agreed, but not out of softness. I needed him to understand the consequences, to see the life he'd thrown away. We met at a neutral coffee shop, the kind of place where strangers wouldn't notice the tension between us. He looked older, his eyes shadowed, his charm dimmed. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said, and for the first time, I believed him. But sorry wasn't enough. "I'm filing the papers," I told him, my voice steady. "You can see Ethan, but we're done. You broke us, David." He nodded, tears in his eyes, but he didn't argue. Maybe he knew he'd lost the right. I walked away, feeling lighter, not because I'd forgiven him, but because I'd chosen myself. Ethan deserved a mother who was whole, and I'd fight to be that for him. Mark texted later, checking in. Lila had moved out, staying with a friend while they sorted out custody. "It's messy," he wrote, "but I'm okay." I replied, "Me too." It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. The cabin confrontation had been our first step, not toward revenge, but toward freedom. David and Lila had destroyed parts of us, but they hadn't won. We were still here, standing, ready to rebuild. The weeks after the cabin felt like walking through fog, every step deliberate, every moment heavy with the weight of what was lost. Ethan noticed the shift, his small hand tugging at mine as we sat on the couch. "Is Dad coming home soon?" he asked, his voice so innocent it broke me. I hugged him tightly, promising myself he'd never carry the full burden of David's choices. "Dad's staying somewhere else for now," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But he loves you, and you'll see him soon." It was the truth, or close enough. David moved into an apartment across town, a sterile box that matched his hollow apologies. We agreed on a custody schedule, but every drop-off was a knife twist. His forced smile, Ethan's confusion, my own heart splintering. I threw myself into work, into Ethan, into keeping the pieces of our life together. The cabin became my refuge, a place to breathe, to remember who I was before David's betrayal. I took Ethan there on weekends, teaching him to fish, to laugh, to find joy in the simplicity of the lake. Mark and I stayed in touch, our texts a lifeline through the chaos. He was navigating his own storm. Lila had spiraled, blaming him for their marriage's collapse, refusing to take responsibility. "She's acting like the victim," he wrote one night. "It's exhausting." I understood. David's remorse had faded into defensiveness, his apologies replaced by excuses about how I'd pushed him away. The irony stung. How could I push him away when he'd already left me? One evening, Mark called. "I found something," he said, his voice tense. "Lila's been posting online, playing the martyr. She's saying I drove her to cheat." My stomach churned. I'd seen similar hints from David, vague social media posts about finding himself, as if I'd been the one holding him captive. "They're rewriting the story," I said, anger flaring. "They can't face what they did, so they're making us the villains." Mark agreed, and we decided to act, not out of spite, but to protect the truth. We met at the same diner where we'd first connected, laptops open, coffee cold. Mark had screenshots of Lila's posts, each one a twisted version of reality. I had David's texts, saved from before the confrontation, filled with lies and promises to Lila. Together, we crafted a plan, not to expose them publicly, but to ensure our children, our families, knew the truth. We wrote letters to our closest friends and family, laying out the facts without venom. "We're not doing this to hurt them," Mark said. "We're doing it to protect our kids." The letters were sent, and the ripple effect was immediate. My sister called, furious on my behalf, promising to keep Ethan shielded from gossip. David's parents reached out, their voices heavy with disappointment. "We raised him better," his mother said, her words a small balm. Mark reported similar reactions. His family rallied around him and Emily, while Lila's friends began to distance themselves. The truth wasn't a weapon, it was a shield, and we wielded it carefully. But the cabin called me back, a reminder that healing wasn't linear. I went alone one weekend, leaving Ethan with my sister. The silence was both comfort and curse, letting me feel every raw edge of my pain. I sat on the porch, watching the lake, and let myself cry, not for David, but for the life I'd believed in. The tears were cleansing, a release I hadn't allowed myself. I wrote in a journal, pouring out the anger, the love, the confusion. By the time I left, the cabin felt lighter, like it was ready to hold new memories. Mark invited me to a park playdate with Emily and Ethan, a tentative step toward normalcy. Watching our kids chase each other, laughing under the spring sun, I felt a flicker of hope. "They're going to be okay," Mark said, his eyes on Emily. "We're going to make sure of it." I nodded, believing it for the first time. Our children were our anchor, our reason to keep going. David and Lila had taken so much, but they couldn't take that. Back home, I found a letter from David, slipped under the door. "I'm trying to be better," he wrote. "For Ethan, for myself. I hope you can forgive me someday." I read it twice, then tucked it away. Forgiveness wasn't on the table, not yet, but I didn't hate him. I pitied him, a man who'd thrown away everything for a fantasy that crumbled under scrutiny. I didn't need his redemption to move forward. I had Ethan, the cabin, and a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Spring turned to summer, and the cabin became my sanctuary, a place where Ethan and I could rebuild. We painted the walls, brightening the space with colors that felt like hope, soft blues and warm yellows. Ethan's laughter echoed as he splashed in the lake, his resilience a reminder that children could heal where adults faltered. But the scars of David's betrayal lingered, surfacing in quiet moments when I'd catch myself staring at the empty side of the bed. Mark and I grew closer, not romantically, but as allies forged in fire. We met for coffee, shared updates on our kids, and swapped stories of navigating single parenthood. Lila's fighting for custody, he told me one afternoon, his face lined with worry. "She's saying I'm unfit because I work too much." I reached for his hand, a gesture of solidarity. "She won't win," I said. "You're Emily's rock. The courts will see that." He nodded, but the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. David had hinted at wanting more time with Ethan, and I dreaded the battle ahead. The legal process was a grind, each meeting with lawyers draining me further. David's attorney argued he deserved equal custody, painting him as a devoted father who'd made a mistake. I wanted to scream that a mistake was forgetting an anniversary, not an affair that shattered our family. But I stayed calm, presenting evidence of his neglect. Missed school events, nights Ethan waited for a father who never came home. My lawyer was fierce, and I clung to her assurance that Ethan's well-being would come first. Meanwhile, Lila's social media campaign continued, her posts growing bolder, accusing Mark of emotional neglect. I saw the toll it took on him, the way his shoulders slumped when he talked about Emily. "She's trying to rewrite history," he said, his voice bitter. I understood. David had started seeing a therapist, claiming he was working on himself, as if that erased the months of lies. Their attempts to salvage their images only deepened our resolve to protect our truth. One evening, Ethan asked to visit the cabin again. "Can Dad come too?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. My heart sank, but I couldn't lie to him. "Maybe one day," I said, "but right now it's our place, okay?" He nodded, accepting it with a child's trust. That night, I called Mark, needing to hear a voice that understood. "How do you balance it?" I asked, letting Emily hope for Lila, but protecting her from disappointment. He sighed. "I don't know. I just keep showing up, every day, until she knows I'm not going anywhere." His words stayed with me, a mantra for the long road ahead. I showed up, for Ethan, for myself, for the life I was rebuilding. The cabin became a symbol of that, a place where we could start fresh. I invited friends over, filling the space with laughter and music, reclaiming it from the shadow of David's betrayal. One night, as we roasted marshmallows by the lake, Ethan looked up at me, his face glowing in the firelight. "This is the best place, Mom," he said. I smiled, my heart swelling. "It is, buddy." Mark and Emily joined us for a weekend, the kids racing through the woods while we sat on the porch, sharing a beer. "We did good, didn't we?" he said, gesturing to the lake. "We didn't let them take this." I nodded, feeling the truth of it. The cabin was ours, not just in ownership, but in spirit. David and Lila had tried to claim it for their affair, but we'd fought back, not with vengeance, but with resilience. As summer faded, I got a call from my lawyer. David had agreed to my terms, giving me primary custody with supervised visits for him. It wasn't a victory, not really, but it was a step toward stability for Ethan. Mark texted later, his own news bittersweet. Lila had backed off, agreeing to joint custody with conditions. "We're free," he wrote, and I felt the weight of those words. Not free from pain, but free to move forward, to choose our paths without their shadows. The cabin stood waiting, a testament to what we'd endured and overcome. I planned to take Ethan there for his birthday, to celebrate not just him, but us, our little family, scarred but strong. David and Lila were fading, their choices a chapter we'd survived. The lake sparkled under the sun, and I knew, deep down, that we'd be okay. Fall arrived, painting the lake in hues of amber and crimson. The cabin stood as a beacon of my new beginning, its walls no longer echoing with betrayal, but with the promise of renewal. Ethan's birthday was a week away, and I planned a weekend at the lake, just the two of us, to celebrate his 7th year and our resilience. The scars of David's affair were still there, faint but present, but they no longer defined us. I saw David occasionally at drop-offs or school events, his presence a reminder of what was and what would never be again. He'd changed, or so he claimed, therapy, a new job, a quieter life. But his apologies, though frequent, couldn't erase the nights I'd cried alone, the moments I'd doubted my worth. I didn't hate him anymore. I simply didn't need him. Ethan was my focus, his laughter my anchor, his trust my reason to keep going. Mark and I met one last time before he moved to Portland with Emily, seeking a fresh start near his family. We sat at the diner, the same one where we'd planned our confrontation, and shared a quiet smile. "We made it through," he said, his voice warm. "Not just the cabin, but all of it." I nodded, feeling the truth settle in my bones. We'd been strangers, united by betrayal, but now we were something more, friends, perhaps, or simply two people who'd helped each other heal. He showed me a picture of Emily, her gap-toothed grin bright against the backdrop of a park. "She's asking about her mom less," he said. "I think she's starting to feel safe again." I thought of Ethan, how he'd stopped asking when David would come home, how he'd started drawing pictures of the cabin instead. Our children were finding their way, just as we were. Mark reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're stronger than you know, Claire." I smiled, my throat tight. "So are you." The custody battles had settled, leaving both Mark and me with primary care of our kids. Lila had moved to another city, her social media silent, her fight for sympathy abandoned. David was complying with the visitation schedule, showing up for Ethan with a consistency that surprised me. I didn't trust it fully, but I let it be, for Ethan's sake, not David's. The cabin remained my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, where Ethan could grow, where we could be us without the weight of the past. For Ethan's birthday, I decorated the cabin with streamers and balloons, turning it into a haven of joy. His friends came, their laughter filling the air as they played by the lake. I watched from the porch, my heart full. This was what I'd fought for, not revenge, not even justice, but this moment. My son, happy, surrounded by love. The cabin was ours again, its memories rewritten with every smile, every splash in the water. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I sat by the fire, a glass of wine in hand. The lake was still, reflecting the stars like a mirror. I thought of Mark, of Emily, of the paths we were forging apart but parallel. I thought of David and Lila, their choices a distant echo, no longer loud enough to drown out my peace. The cabin had been the stage for our pain, but it was also the place where we'd reclaimed our strength. I pulled out my journal, writing a letter I'd never sent. "David," I wrote, "you broke me, but I rebuilt myself. This cabin, this life, this love for Ethan, it's mine. You don't get to define me anymore." I tore the page out, tossing it into the fire, watching the flames consume it. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was closure. As I locked up the cabin the next morning, Ethan ran to me, his arms wide. "Can we come back next weekend?" he asked, his eyes bright. I laughed, pulling him close. "Every weekend, if you want." The lake stretched before us, endless and calm, a reminder that we'd survived the storm. Mark texted as we drove home. "Emily says hi. Keep the cabin ready for us someday." I smiled, texting back, "Always." The road ahead was uncertain, but it was ours. The cabin, the lake, Ethan's laughter, they were my home, my truth, my triumph. David and Lila had tried to destroy us, but we'd risen, stronger, together. And as the trees blurred past, I knew we'd never look back.